Princess Arya stood in the grand hall of the Xyloxian Empire's palace, her mind a mixture of confusion and determination. The hall was a marvel of alien architecture, filled with towering columns and shimmering translucent walls that reflected the stars outside. Dignitaries from various worlds filled the room, whispering in different languages, their voices blending into a low hum of anticipation. Today the princess was to marry a human. Arya had always been taught that humans were weak, primitive creatures. Their planet Earth was a distant, insignificant speck in the galaxy, a place where war and conflict ran rampant. They had no place among the stars, at least not in the way the other civilizations did. The Xyloxians, with their advanced technology and ancient history, had always looked down on the humans. The princess had never expected her life to intertwine with one. Her marriage to Jonathan Cross, a human diplomat chosen to represent Earth in the galactic community, was a strategic move for both empires. Earth had requested a treaty to establish better relations, and the Xyloxian Emperor, Arya's father, had seen an opportunity. Marrying his daughter to the human diplomat would cement Earth's place in the Galactic Council, making it harder for their enemies to dismiss them. Arya had heard that Jonathan was charming, polite, and soft-spoken, but in her mind, none of that mattered. He was human, he would never be a threat. She had seen Earth's leaders on the Galactic Council, their eyes filled with uncertainty, their words often lacking conviction. Arya didn't fear them. She didn't fear Jonathan. She had no reason to. Her father had explained that this union would strengthen their empire, but Arya still felt uneasy. How could she, a royal so firmly entrenched in Xyloxian tradition, marry someone so different? He was a mere man with no power, no history, and certainly no ability to lead. It was simply a political alliance, nothing more. She had to remind herself of that over and over. As the doors to the grand hall opened, Arya turned toward them. The crowd fell silent, and all eyes turned to the human. Jonathan Cross entered the room with quiet dignity, his dark hair neatly combed, his suit perfectly pressed. He looked both out of place and strangely fitting among the alien royalty. His deep brown eyes met Arya's, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something more than just the polite diplomat she had expected. But it was fleeting. Jonathan smiled, bowing politely to the assembled guests. His smile was warm, genuine, and it disarmed her. But she couldn't let herself be distracted. He was still human. She had to remember that. The ceremony began. Arya could feel her father's eyes on her, heavy with expectation. She stood tall, her back straight, as Jonathan approached her. The words of the ancient Xyloxian oath were spoken, echoing in the grand hall, sealing the bond between them. Arya barely listened, her mind still preoccupied with the strangeness of the situation. As Jonathan took her hand, she noticed how soft his touch was. His skin, unlike the roughened hands of her own people, felt smooth. She could feel the warmth of his palm, and for a brief moment she wondered how different it might be living with someone like him. But she quickly brushed the thought aside. The ceremony was over, and with it, her marriage had officially begun. Life after the betrothal. In the days that followed the ceremony, Arya found herself spending more time with Jonathan than she had expected. He was assigned a suite in the royal palace, his own quarters next to hers, and the two of them had to attend numerous functions together. They were always accompanied by royal attendants, but the moments alone, the quiet conversations, were something Arya wasn't used to. She had expected Jonathan to be meek, easily intimidated by the grandeur of the palace and its customs. But she soon discovered that he was not easily shaken. He listened to her when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and never seemed overwhelmed by the weight of his position. At first, Arya found these interactions strange. Jonathan would often smile at her in ways she didn't fully understand, his expressions gentle, his tone respectful. He had a kind of patience she wasn't used to, especially from someone who should have been out of his depth. One evening, as they sat together in the palace gardens, Arya found herself watching Jonathan as he looked up at the stars. "Do you miss Earth?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Jonathan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he replied. "But I'm here now, and I'm doing what I can to help both of our worlds." There was something in his words that struck her. He wasn't simply here to fulfill his duty as a diplomat. He seemed to truly care about the future of Earth and the Xyloxians. But why? She couldn't understand. To him, the Xyloxians were an ancient empire with untold power. Why should he, a mere human, concern himself with their well-being? The answer, however, came in the form of his actions. Jonathan had been studying the ancient Xyloxian history in his spare time, learning about the culture, the struggles, and the accomplishments of the people he now shared his life with. He had even learned the Xyloxian language, not just the formal dialect used in the royal courts, but the casual expressions, the idioms, the nuances that made the language uniquely theirs. Arya, ever the skeptic, found it curious. She had assumed Jonathan would only learn enough to get by. After all, he wasn't here to rule or lead. He was just here to represent Earth, but this was something more. The first glimpse of the unexpected one afternoon, as Arya walked through the palace gardens, she overheard a conversation between Jonathan and one of the royal advisors. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her curiosity got the better of her. The advisor was speaking of a political matter, something that Arya had been briefed on before. The treaty with Earth was on shaky ground, and some of the Xyloxian nobles were beginning to question the alliance. They worried that it might be too much of a risk to rely on a race so young and untested. Jonathan, much to Arya's surprise, spoke with authority. "The treaty is vital," he said, his voice firm. "But it's not just about politics. It's about securing a future where both our species thrive. If we don't act now, the galaxy will see us as weak. Earth has much to offer, and we have much to offer in return." The advisor was taken aback, clearly impressed by Jonathan's conviction. But Arya, watching from behind a tall statue, felt a sudden rush of unease. Jonathan's words were not those of a meek diplomat. He was speaking with the confidence of someone who believed in the strength of his position, someone who had seen something in the relationship between their worlds that she had yet to understand. She turned and left the gardens, her mind spinning. Had she truly underestimated him? He was supposed to be a mere pawn in her father's game, a useful but harmless figurehead. Yet she was beginning to wonder if he had a purpose of his own. And if he did, what would it mean for her, for the Xyloxian Empire, and for their future? Days passed, and the marriage between Princess Arya and Jonathan Cross continued with an air of quiet tension. On the surface, everything seemed to be falling into place. Arya did her duty as a princess, attending royal events and fulfilling her obligations to the Empire. Jonathan, meanwhile, continued his work as the Earth ambassador, meeting with dignitaries and assisting with the treaty discussions. But beneath the surface, things were far from as simple as they appeared. Arya had always expected that Jonathan would remain a passive participant in their alliance. He was, after all, a human, a species that Arya had been taught to see as primitive, weak, and unremarkable in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But the more she spent time with him, the more she began to question her own assumptions. He was different from what she had been told. He wasn't like the other diplomats she had met. It wasn't just his intelligence or his charm, though both were undeniable. It was the way he seemed to absorb the complexities of the Xyloxian Empire with ease, his sharp mind piecing together the intricate web of politics, history, and diplomacy with remarkable skill. Arya had caught him on more than one occasion reading ancient Xyloxian texts, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he studied their culture and history. He had learned the language quickly, mastering not just the formal version used in court, but the more casual dialect that the common people spoke. At first, Arya had been impressed by his curiosity, but now it made her uneasy. How could a human, so new to this galaxy, understand their culture so deeply? She had never expected him to be so engaged, so involved. To her, his actions were starting to feel like more than simple diplomacy. He was learning their secrets, uncovering their history, and Arya couldn't help but wonder why. It was on a quiet evening that the answer began to reveal itself. The royal palace, perched high above the planet's capital, was a place of endless beauty, with gardens that stretched for miles and walls adorned with ancient Xyloxian artwork. Arya often sought solitude there, away from the expectations of the court and the weight of her responsibilities. But on this evening, she was not alone. Jonathan had come to visit her. "Are you busy, Arya?" Jonathan asked as he entered the room. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of urgency in his tone. He had come to speak with her, but there was something more on his mind. "No," Arya replied, setting aside the royal reports she had been reading. What is it? Jonathan hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from her. There's something I've found. Something important. Arya raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. What is it? Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. I've been researching the Xyloxian archives. There are discrepancies, hidden records, documents that don't make sense. It seems there's a part of Xyloxian history that's been erased. Arya's heart skipped a beat. Her empire was known for its transparency, its respect for history and for truth. The idea that there could be something buried, something erased from the public record, was unthinkable. What do you mean? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. It's a rebellion. A group of Xyloxian warriors believed to have been wiped out centuries ago were actually exiled to a remote planet, and they're still alive. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike, to take back what they believe is rightfully theirs. Arya stood up, pacing across the room. This is impossible. My father would have known. The council. Your father's health is failing. Jonathan interrupted gently. I don't think he's in full control anymore. And the council? Well, not everyone in the council has your best interests at heart. Arya's mind raced. The idea of a hidden rebellion, a secret faction waiting in the shadows, was almost too much to comprehend. But Jonathan's words made sense. More sense than she wanted to admit. The cracks in the Empire's leadership were beginning to show. And if there truly was a hidden force waiting to rise, it could mean disaster for everything Arya had known. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What do you suggest we do? Jonathan stood up as well, his gaze firm and determined. We need to find them before they find us. I've already started gathering information. I have a contact who can help us, someone who's been studying these rogue warriors for years. But we need to act quickly. If this rebellion is as big as I think it is, the entire empire could be in danger. Arya felt a chill run down her spine. But we don't even know where they are. How can we find them? Jonathan smiled, a glint of confidence in his eyes. I think I know exactly where to look. The search begins. The next few days were filled with tension and urgency. Arya and Jonathan worked in secret, planning their next moves carefully. They knew that their actions had to remain hidden from the Royal Council, who would likely oppose any attempts to investigate the rebellion. Jonathan's plan was risky, but it was the only option they had. Together, they arranged a secret meeting with Jonathan's mysterious contact, a former Xyloxian soldier named Zira. She had once served in the Imperial Guard, but had been exiled after questioning the Empire's leadership. Now living in hiding, Zira had become an expert on the hidden factions within the Xyloxian military. If anyone knew where the rebellion was, it was her. Arya and Jonathan met Zira in a secluded corner of the royal gardens, far from the prying eyes of the palace. Zira was a tall woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. She didn't smile as she greeted them, but her gaze was sharp, assessing. I hear you found something, Zira said, her voice low and guarded. Something that could change everything. Jonathan nodded. We need to know where the rogue warriors are hiding. We need to stop them before they can act. Zira considered this for a moment, then pulled out a small device from her belt. It was a map, but unlike any map Arya had ever seen. It was ancient, its edges worn and faded, but as Zira activated it, a glowing hologram appeared in front of them, revealing a series of hidden coordinates. These are the places they've been hiding, Zira explained, scattered across the galaxy, in places where the Xyloxian Empire never bothered to look. Arya stared at the map, her mind spinning. These locations, they're all on planets that have been thought to be uninhabited. Jonathan stepped forward, his finger tracing the map's glowing lines. These are their strongholds. If we don't move quickly, the rebellion could gain too much power. They could be ready to strike at any moment. Zira nodded grimly. Then we don't have much time. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to stop them. Arya felt a weight settle on her shoulders. She had always thought of herself as a leader, someone who understood her people and their needs. But now, standing on the edge of a rebellion she had never even known existed, she realized how little she truly understood. And she realized, too, that Jonathan, her human husband, was not the simple, harmless man she had once thought him to be. He was becoming her partner in a struggle that could change the fate of her empire. The icy landscape of the moon stretched out in front of them, a vast expanse of frozen wasteland. Arya and Jonathan had landed their ship in a small, secluded valley, hidden from the view of any satellites or patrolling ships. The rebel base, according to Sierra's map, was nearby, beneath layers of snow and rock buried deep in the heart of the moon. They didn't know what they would find once they reached it, but both of them knew they had no choice but to press forward. The fate of the Xyloxian Empire depended on it. Ready? Jonathan asked, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. Arya nodded. She had never been on a mission like this before. She had spent most of her life in the palace, surrounded by luxury and security. But now, as they stood at the edge of the unknown, she felt a rush of adrenaline she hadn't known she was capable of. The princess of the Xyloxian Empire, alone with a human in the icy wilderness, hunting down a hidden rebellion that could bring down everything she had known. The situation seemed almost surreal. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, though she could feel her heart racing in her chest. Together, they moved toward the coordinates, careful to avoid detection. The wind howled around them, the cold biting at their faces and numbing their limbs. Despite the frigid conditions, they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Every step took them deeper into the moon's desolate landscape, the rocky terrain growing more treacherous with each passing minute. Hours later, they reached the entrance to the rebel base, a large cave-like opening in the side of a cliff. The base was hidden from view, shielded by layers of thick ice and rock. The opening was well concealed, almost as if the moon itself wanted to keep the secrets buried inside. Jonathan's eyes flickered with caution as he approached the entrance. He activated a small device from his belt, a scanner that would allow them to assess the security systems and figure out how to enter the base without triggering alarms. Arya stood watch, her senses on high alert. She had been trained in diplomacy, not combat, but this was no time for hesitation. "Security is light," Jonathan whispered, his eyes scanning the results on the scanner. "It's almost too easy." Arya's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Jonathan looked at her, his expression serious. "It could mean they're expecting us. Or it could mean this place has been abandoned." "Abandoned?" Arya repeated, surprised. "But Zira said they've been hiding here for years. Why would they leave now?" "I don't know," Jonathan said, his brow furrowing. "But we're about to find out." With a final glance toward Arya, Jonathan led the way inside. The cave was cold and dark, with only the dim light from their flashlights illuminating the path ahead. As they moved deeper into the base, the air grew colder, the silence almost suffocating. Arya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every step they took seemed to echo in the emptiness, as though the very walls were watching them. They passed several rooms, each filled with abandoned equipment and old, rusted machinery. It was clear that the place had been long unused. Arya's mind raced. If this was the heart of the rebellion, then why was it so quiet? Where were the people they were supposed to confront? Then, as they turned a corner, they came across something unexpected. A door, slightly ajar, led into a large chamber. Inside, they found rows of computers and terminals, all powered up and running. But it wasn't just the technology that caught their attention. There, in the center of the room, was a holographic display, one that seemed to be playing a message. Jonathan approached it cautiously, and Arya followed close behind. As they watched, the message began to play, its holographic figures flickering in and out of focus. The face of an older Xyloxian man appeared on the screen, his features sharp, his expression grave. "This is Commander Zevor," the man's voice echoed through the room. "If you are watching this, then you have found our hidden base. But what you are seeing is not a victory. It is a warning." The image flickered again and the message continued. "The rebellion is not dead, nor is it gone. It has merely gone underground, waiting for the right moment. We have infiltrated every level of the Xyloxian government. The Empire is weakening from within. There are traitors among you, and when the time is right, we will rise again." Arya's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was a conspiracy. The rebels were not only hiding, they were embedded in the very heart of the Empire. And if Commander Zevor's words were true, then the Xyloxian leadership, her father included, was in far greater danger than she had ever imagined. "This is impossible," Arya murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan's face was grim. "It gets worse, look." He pointed to another section of the screen where a map was displayed, much like the one Zira had shown them. But this one was different. It was a detailed network of locations, showing key points within the Xyloxian Empire that had been compromised. High-ranking officials, military bases, and even royal family members were marked with red dots. Arya's blood ran cold as she recognized the names of her father's closest advisors, people she had known her entire life. "This is far bigger than we thought," Jonathan said, his voice filled with concern. "There are traitors everywhere. The rebellion isn't just hiding. It's infiltrating every part of your empire." Arya felt as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. She had always trusted her father, the Emperor, to lead the Xyloxian Empire with wisdom and strength. But now, as the truth of the conspiracy unfolded before her eyes, she realized how little she truly knew. The empire she had been raised to protect was under threat from within, and there was no telling who could be trusted anymore. "We need to warn your father," Jonathan said, his voice urgent. "We need to get back to the capital and expose this before it's too late." Arya hesitated. The thought of confronting her father with this information was terrifying. He had been the ruler of the Xyloxian Empire for decades. To accuse him of allowing such a conspiracy to flourish under his watch felt like a betrayal. But deep down she knew Jonathan was right. The Empire was crumbling, and if they didn't act fast, it could all be lost. "I'll go back," Arya said, her voice shaky but determined. "I'll speak with my father, I have to. But we need to prepare for what's coming. We can't wait any longer." Jonathan nodded. "I'll stay by your side. We'll face this together." The two of them turned and headed back to the entrance of the rebel base, their minds heavy with the gravity of what they had uncovered. As they made their way through the cold, silent halls of the base, Arya's mind raced. There was no going back now. The conspiracy was real, and it was much bigger than either of them had imagined. They had uncovered the first layer of a terrifying truth, but they both knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Exposing the conspiracy, confronting the traitors, and saving the Empire would be their greatest challenge. But one thing was clear. Arya couldn't do it alone. Jonathan Cross, the human she had once thought so insignificant, was now her only ally in a fight for the future of the Xyloxian Empire, and together, they would face the storm. The journey back to the capital was tense. The information they had uncovered in the rebel base weighed heavily on both Arya and Jonathan. It was one thing to know about a rebellion in the shadows, but it was another to realize that the conspiracy ran deep, so deep that it had infected the very heart of the Empire. There were traitors at every level, and the ones they had trusted the most might be the very ones conspiring against them. Arya stared out the window of the spacecraft as the capital came into view. The sprawling city with its towering spires and vast plazas looked peaceful from the air. But beneath that surface of calm, the Empire was unraveling. She had once thought that her father, the Emperor, was untouchable. He had ruled for decades, keeping the Xyloxian Empire strong and prosperous. But now, with the rebellion spreading like wildfire within the ranks, Arya wasn't sure who she could trust. Could she trust her father? Could she even trust the Royal Council? "Do you think we can stop it?" Arya asked quietly, turning to Jonathan, who sat beside her, his brow furrowed in thought. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He had been unusually quiet during the flight back. But after a moment he looked up at her, his eyes steady. "I don't know. But we have to try. We know they're waiting for the right moment to strike. If we expose them now, we might still have a chance." Arya nodded, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The thought of exposing her own people, the very ones who had helped her father rule, was difficult to bear. But she knew Jonathan was right. They couldn't wait any longer. The longer they delayed, the stronger the rebellion would become. They had to act now, confronting the Empire. The royal palace was as grand as ever when they arrived, the gleaming white walls and golden accents catching the sunlight as they entered the heart of the capital. But today the palace felt cold to Arya, as if the very stones of the building were hiding secrets. She had never felt so out of place in her own home. Every step she took toward the throne room felt heavier than the last, the weight of what they had discovered hanging over her like a storm cloud. Jonathan stood by her side as they made their way through the hallways, his calm presence a steadying force. Arya was grateful for him. The mission had become too dangerous, too complicated, and there were times when she wasn't sure she could keep going. But with him by her side, she felt like they had a chance. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was her partner in all of this, a key to the future of the Xyloxian Empire, and perhaps the only person she could truly trust. When they reached the throne room, Arya paused, her hand resting on the door. She could hear her father's voice from within, his deep tone carrying the weight of authority. The Emperor had always been a figure of strength both physically and politically. But now, with the knowledge of the conspiracy weighing heavily on her, Arya wasn't sure if she could look at him the same way again. "You ready?" Jonathan asked quietly, his voice low but reassuring. Arya took a deep breath and nodded. "I have no choice." With that, she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the throne room. The Emperor sat on his golden throne, looking regal as always, his silver hair shining in the soft light that filtered through the high windows. He looked up at Arya and Jonathan as they entered, his expression unreadable. Around him stood a small group of trusted advisors, including some of the very people Arya had seen on the map. People whose names had been marked as traitors. It sent a chill down her spine to see them here, standing so close to her father, pretending to be loyal when they were, in fact, plotting against him. "Arya," the Emperor said, his voice warm but there was an edge to it. "Jonathan, you've returned. I trust the mission was successful?" Arya struggled to keep her composure. "Father, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "There's something we've discovered, something you need to know." The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Arya stepped forward, taking a deep breath. "There's a rebellion," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her words. "And it's not what we thought. It's not just a group of radicals hiding in the shadows. There's a conspiracy within the Empire itself. High-ranking officials, people we've trusted, are part of it. They're planning to overthrow the throne, and they've infiltrated every level of the government." The room fell silent. Arya could feel the eyes of the advisors on her, some of them narrowing in suspicion, others pretending not to notice. Her father's face remained calm, but his eyes flashed with something, fear perhaps, or disbelief. "A rebellion?" The Emperor repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're sure of this?" "I'm sure," Arya replied, her voice firm. "We found evidence, hidden maps, encrypted messages. It's all there. The rebellion has been planning for years, waiting for the right moment, and now that moment is coming." The Emperor stood up, his face pale. This is treason. If what you say is true, then we must act quickly." "But who is behind this?" Arya hesitated. She glanced at Jonathan, who gave a small nod, encouraging her to continue. "The traitors are already in this room," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of truth. "Some of the people you've trusted the most are working against you, Father." There was a collective gasp from the advisors, but the Emperor's face grew pale, his eyes searching the room. He turned to one of his closest advisors, a man named Gellius, whose name had been marked on the map. "Gellius," the Emperor said quietly, his voice laced with suspicion. "What do you have to say about this?" Gellius, who had always been a loyal servant of the Empire, looked shocked. "Sire, he stammered, but his words trailed off as he realized there was nowhere to hide. Arya stepped forward. "The evidence is clear. We can't trust him, Father." Jonathan's voice was calm but firm. "And it's not just him. There are others. We have to act before they strike." The room was filled with tension, every eye focused on the Emperor, who seemed to be grappling with the enormity of the situation. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice grave. "Then we have no time to lose." The battle for the Empire. The following hours were a blur of activity. Arya, Jonathan, and the Emperor's loyal forces worked together to secure the palace. The traitors among the royal advisors were quickly arrested, but not without a fight. The rebellion had been planning their move for some time, and their supporters in the palace had been ready to act. But with Arya's warnings, they were able to stop the coup before it could unfold completely. It was a tense standoff, but in the end, the rebellion's leaders were captured, and their plot was exposed for all to see. The Empire was shaken, but it survived. Arya's father, the Emperor, though wounded by the betrayal of those he had trusted, stood firm, reaffirming his rule over the Empire. Arya stood at his side, Jonathan by her side as well, watching as the last of the traitors were led away. The battle for the throne was over for now, but Arya knew this was only the beginning. The rebellion had been stopped, but the seeds of distrust had already been sown. The Zalaxian Empire had to rebuild, and it would take time to heal the wounds that had been opened. Jonathan turned to Arya, his expression softening as he spoke quietly. "You did it." Arya gave him a small smile. "We did it. For the first time since their journey began, Arya felt a sense of peace. The Empire had been saved, and she had learned something she would never forget. Strength didn't always come from power. Sometimes it came from trusting others and from knowing when to rely on them. Jonathan Cross, the human she had once thought so harmless, had become her greatest ally, and together, they had saved the Empire. As the two of them walked side by side through the halls of the palace, Arya realized something else. This was her empire, her responsibility, and no matter what happened in the future, she would be ready to face it with Jonathan at her side. Ilara Wren had always known that politics was a game of power and subtlety. She had spent years in the halls of the Galactic Embassy, learning the delicate art of negotiation. Born into a family with a long history of serving as diplomats, Ilara had inherited their talent for diplomacy. But even with all her training, nothing could have prepared her for the day she met Lysander Calloway. Lysander was a name that carried weight. He was a diplomat, an emissary for the Federation of Intergalactic Nations, and one of the brightest minds in galactic relations. To most people, he was a symbol of calm and composure, a man of elegance and grace who could navigate the most complex political landscapes with ease. But to Ilara, Lysander seemed different from the moment they first crossed paths at a high-profile summit in the capital city of Etheria. It was the first time Ilara had seen him up close, and the moment their eyes met across the Grand Hall, she couldn't look away. Lysander stood among a group of ambassadors, his presence commanding attention without saying a word. He had the aura of someone who knew the power of silence and used it to his advantage. His features were striking, his sharp jawline and steady gaze giving him an air of mystery. Even from a distance, Ilara could sense the confidence that radiated from him. But what really stood out to her was the way he carried himself. Unlike the other diplomats who were often caught up in small talk or the politics of the moment, Lysander was focused, listening intently, his eyes scanning the room as if he were already strategizing his next move. There was something about him that intrigued Ilara, a quiet strength she couldn't quite place. It didn't take long for their paths to cross. After the summit, there was a reception held at one of the grandest hotels in the city, a place where the rich and powerful mingled, exchanging secrets and making deals behind closed doors. Ilara was standing by a balcony looking out at the city lights when a voice behind her broke the silence. "Stunning view, isn't it?" She turned to see Lysander standing just a few feet away, his eyes locking with hers in a way that made her heart race. There was a warmth in his smile that caught her off guard. For a moment she forgot about the noise of the crowd around them. "Yes, it is," Ilara replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I've been to this hotel many times, but I've never really taken in the view." Lysander stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. It's easy to get caught up in the chaos of politics. Sometimes we forget to pause and appreciate the simple things. His words resonated with Ilara, and she found herself drawn to him, intrigued not just by his appearance, but by the calmness that seemed to surround him. They talked for a while about nothing in particular, just casual conversation. But there was something in the way Lysander listened, the way his eyes never wavered, that made Ilara feel like she was the only person in the room. When the evening ended, Lysander took Ilara aside. "Would you like to get some dinner? I know a quiet place nearby where we can talk," he suggested. His voice was low, inviting. Ilara hesitated, but only for a moment. She had never been one to mix business with pleasure, but there was something about Lysander that made her feel safe, even in the midst of such a chaotic world. She agreed, and they walked out into the cool night air, leaving the noise of the reception behind them. Over dinner, Lysander shared stories of his travels, the different worlds he had visited, the leaders he had met. His charm was undeniable, and Ilara found herself laughing at his anecdotes, feeling more at ease than she had in a long time. As the night went on, their conversation shifted to more personal topics. Ilara spoke of her family, her upbringing as the daughter of a diplomat, and the challenges of being a woman in a field dominated by men. Lysander listened intently, offering thoughtful responses. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Not many people would have the courage to take on the responsibilities that you have." Ilara smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. The constant pressure, the expectations. I love what I do, but I often feel like I'm living in the shadow of my family's legacy." Lysander reached across the table, his hand briefly touching hers. "You've built your own path, Alara. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "I can see it in your eyes. You're more than capable of shaping your own future." His words were comforting, and Alara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had never met anyone quite like Lysander before, someone who seemed to understand her struggles without judgment. By the end of the evening, she found herself not wanting the night to end. In the weeks that followed, their meetings became more frequent. They attended events together, discussed political matters over coffee, and enjoyed quiet moments where they could be themselves. Alara found herself increasingly captivated by Lysander, not just because of his intelligence and charm, but because of the way he made her feel seen and heard. In his presence, she felt like she could be more than just a diplomat. She could be herself. Lysander, too, seemed drawn to Alara. There was a quiet admiration in his gaze whenever they spoke, and he never seemed to rush her or push her into anything. His patience and understanding made Alara trust him more than anyone she had ever known. Soon their connection deepened, and what had begun as a professional relationship blossomed into something more. It wasn't long before Lysander proposed. The idea of marriage seemed almost natural to Alara, given how much they had come to care for each other. She said yes without hesitation, her heart swelling with love and excitement for the future they would build together. The wedding was an event to remember. A lavish ceremony in one of the grandest halls of the Federation, attended by political leaders, ambassadors, and dignitaries from all corners of the galaxy. Alara wore a stunning gown of silver and blue, the colors of peace and diplomacy, while Lysander looked every bit the part of the perfect groom, elegant and composed. As they exchanged vows, Alara's heart swelled with happiness. She had married the man of her dreams, the one person she believed she could spend the rest of her life with. The honeymoon was a dream come true. Quiet moments spent in beautiful locations, away from the prying eyes of the public. It felt like they were in their own little world, free from the pressures of their respective careers. For a time it seemed like everything was perfect, but beneath the surface there were whispers, rumors she couldn't ignore. Whispers that the man she had married was more than just a diplomat, that he carried secrets, ones that even Alara could not fathom. But for now she was content to live in the moment, believing that the life she had always dreamed of was finally within her grasp. Little did she know that the calm life she had imagined was about to be shaken to its core.